Well, we will get going here and we will talk about the year 1903, where the Wright brothers changed life for a good many people. They changed a whole bunch of people's lives, the Wright brothers. When you talk about people who do have an impact on life, and so many people, well, these guys really did have a lasting impact on life. Yeah. America gets the land they need for a Latin American canal. Teddy Roosevelt carried spoke softly, but carried the big stick. What was American life like in 1903? Well, it was different, but the modern era is creeping in. Immigration is a problem. Racism is a problem. People are complaining companies are way, way, way too big. CEOs, they weren't CEOs in those days, but the owners of the companies, the Rockefellers, the Dukes who had American Tobacco and other companies. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? The companies have gotten way too big. Well, Theodore Roosevelt's about ready to bust them up. Henry Ford starts a company. This is another attempt at him starting a car company. Harley Davidson has its first motorcycle that came out in 1903. So you got Ford and Harley Davidson. And then you have this woman, Marian Anderson, invents the windshield wiper. Now, this was not something that people decided they were going to accept, the windshield wiper, but she invents the windshield wiper in 1903. The Williamsburg Bridge opens in 1903, there it is. There's a strange public slaying of an elephant by the name of Topsy at Lunar Park in Coney Island that has something to do with Thomas Edison. Now, you want to go to Broadway? You want to see a show? I got a show for you. The Wizard of Oz opens on Broadway. The Wizard of Oz opened on Broadway in 1903. And baseball fan? Well, we got something for you too, because the Baseball World Series starts in 1903. And you need a present for one of your kids? I'll sell you a teddy bear. The teddy bear starts. And also, keep your kids occupied. You want to keep them occupied? Buy them Crayola crayons. Crayola crayons comes out. And you need something to drink, and do things go better with Coke? Coca-Cola has Coke in it. Real live cocaine, and they have to change the formula. And Joseph Pulitzer establishes a prize for journalism. It's called the Pulitzer Prize. And which is kind of odd because Pulitzer was one of the proponents of yellow journalism only a couple of years earlier. But the Wright brothers, Wilbur and Orville Wright, they changed people's lives. And these are two guys who you would never, ever, ever thought would be at the forefront of literally changing the lives of billions of people. Who were these guys, the Wright brothers? Well, Wilbur Wright was born on April 16, 1867. His brother Orville was born on August 19, 1871. Following their mother's death in 1899, Orville, who had spent several summers learning the printing trade, persuaded his brother Wilbur, join me in the print shop. In addition to printing normal things, they also edited and published a newspaper. So there's nothing special about these guys. These guys are in Ohio, and really there's nothing extraordinary about them, at least not yet. In 1892, the brothers opened a bicycle shop to sell bicycles. Again, nothing unusual about that. They also repaired bicycles, which reminds me, for spring, I got to take my bicycle in. Should take it in now, so it'll be ready for spring as soon as the weather gets warmer. And anyway, they began to build bicycles on a small scale in 1896. Still nothing extraordinary about them. They developed their own self-oiling bicycle wheel hub, It installed a number of light machines inside the tool shop, but still nothing that would suggest they're going to change the world. Profits from the print shop and the bicycle operation eventually were used to fund the Wright brothers' aeronautical experiments that would start a few years later. So they're beginning to think about flying and getting up there, maybe in a glider. And here they are, the Wright brothers. Beginning in 1899, Wilbur and Orville Wright began experimenting with the concepts of flight. They labored in relative obscurity because there was another guy out there trying to get a plane or get something up and going. A guy by the name of Samuel Langley of the Smithsonian. And the press, they were following him. And the War Department was giving him money. But Langley couldn't get anywhere. He just couldn't figure out what he was supposed to do. Meanwhile, the Wrights relied on brute power to keep their theoretically stable machines afloat. They hadn't figured it out yet, but they thought, hey, if we could do this, this, and this, maybe we could get up there. And of course, you need a guy or a girl to go up into this flying machine, and there's no guarantee once you got up there that you were coming back alive. Hope for the best, but expect the worst. It was the Wrights' vision to see that humans would have to fly their machines, that the problems of flight could not be solved from the ground. You had to get up there. In Wilbur's words, it is possible to fly without motors, but not without knowledge and skill. They go to North Carolina, Big Kill Devil Hill, North Carolina, and they go up in gliders, and they do more than 1,000 flights. They made themselves true pilots. They tested it out. Their flying skills were a crucial component of their invention. Before they even attempted power flight, the Wright brothers were masters of the air. And this is what they were in. They were in gliders, which you would just kind of jump off a mountain and just kind of steer this, hoping for the best. The glider experiments on the Outer Banks of North Carolina led them down the path to discovery. Through these experiments, they had solved the problems of sustained lift, and more importantly, they could now control an aircraft while in flight. The brothers felt they were now able to truly fly. But first, you gotta have some power. You need an engine. Gasoline engine technology had recently advanced to where its use in airplanes was feasible. Obviously, they were using it in cars because there were some cars around back in those days. Unable to find a suitable lightweight commercial engine, the brothers said, you know what? We'll come up with our own engine, and they did. It was cruder, less powerful than Samuel Langley's. But the Wrights understood that relatively little power was needed with efficient lifting surfaces and propellers. Such propellers, though, weren't available. Where are you going to get a propeller for something that hasn't been built yet? What are you going to do? But they figured out, you know, maybe we'll get a marine propeller and we'll use the propeller that we get in an air tunnel, and with all of that, they designed the first airplane propeller. And here they are. They're ready to go, and they're all set. Returning to their camp at the Kill Devil Hills, they mounted an engine on their new 40-foot, 605-pound flyer with double tails and elevators. The engine drove two pusher propellers with chains, one crossed to make the props rotate in the opposite direction to create a twisting tendency, or counteract a twisting tendency in flight. A bulky engine and a broken propeller shaft slowed them until they were ready to go on December 14. But, you know, the best laid plans of mice and men. That factors in here. Well, who's going first? Is it going to be Wilbur or is it going to be Orville? Well, the brothers said, hey, anybody got a coin here? You know, we got a coin? I don't have a coin. Do I have a coin? We'll flip the coin. Heads you win, tails I lose, or something like that, using the old Chico Marx coin flip. Anyway, so Wilbur won the coin toss, and he elected to receive. He's going. But he lost his chance to be the first to fly when he oversteered with the elevator after leaving the launch rail. Couldn't do it. The flyer climbed too steeply, stalled, dove into the sand. First flight would have to wait because they needed to repair the plane. On December 17th, Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, they were ready for the second attempt. 27-mile-an-hour wind, that's not good. It was harder than they would have liked because they only thought they were going to go 30, 35 miles an hour, but they decided to go anyway. The headwind would slow their ground speed to a crawl, but they proceeded anyway. With a sheet, they signaled the volunteers from the nearby life-saving station. Life-saving station. They have these people who are there in case something really goes wrong. And so they have the sheet, they go like that. Wilbur lost his turn. It was Orville's turn now, and he goes. And here's the picture, here's the plane, there's Orville, and they're up in the air, the first flight ever. Remembering Wilbur's experience, Orville Wright positioned himself and tested the controls. The stick that moved the horizontal elevator controlled climb and descent. The cradle that he swung with his hips warped the wings, swung the vertical tails, which in combination turned the machine. A lever controlled the gas flow and airspeed recorder. The controls were simple. They were few, but Orville knew that it would take all of his finesse to handle the new and heavier aircraft. At 10:30 in the morning, he released the restraining wire. The flyer moved down the rail as Wilbur steadied the wings. Just as Orville left the ground, John Daniels from the life-saving station snapped the shutter on a preset camera, capturing the historic image of the airplane going up with Wilbur running alongside. Again, the flyer was unruly, pitching up and down as Orville overcompensated with the controls. But here they are. They got up into the air. And these guys are going to have some fun on this day, December 17, 1903. He kept the airplane afloat until it hit the sand about 120 feet from the rail into the 27-mile-an-hour wind. The ground speed had been 6.8 miles an hour, so they were moving at 34 miles an hour. And they're going to have turns. They're having a grand old time. They took turns flying this thing 3 more times that day, getting a feel for the controls and increasing their distance with each flight. Wilbur's second flight, the fourth and last of the day, 852 feet, 59 seconds. They were up there for just about a minute. The Wright machine had flown, but it would never fly again because it would be damaged in the last flight. It was caught by a gust of wind, rolled over, damaged beyond easy repair. The flying season is now over, and the Wrights send their father a telegram, Bishop Milton Wright, and it just says, hey, we went up in the air. But nobody knew it except for these people who were there from the life-saving station, and the Wrights and the father didn't tell anybody. They didn't want their secret stolen. Just say no. Well, the Wright brothers are asked to talk about their flight. December 27th, Octave Chanute invites Wilbur Wright to speak about his powered flights to the American Association for the Advancement of Science. On December 28th, Wilbur Wright declines Chanute's invitation, saying, "We are giving no pictures nor descriptions of machine or methods at present." Which led to the question, did these guys really go up in the air? And that was an open question in 1904 going into 1905. Many people didn't believe them. But they had the picture. They didn't share the picture. Meanwhile, another mode of transportation, well, we got to go from there to there, and we don't want to go around South America. America wants a Central American canal. Now, what were the reasons for that? Well, in 1898, there was a war with Spain. 1898, America annexed Hawaii. They got the Philippines in that war with Spain. They got Guam, they got Cuba, and they got Panama. So all of a sudden, the Americans have a colonial empire, and they need to ship material from Guam and the Philippines to the mainland, or to Puerto Rico, or to Cuba. What are we going to do? We need a canal. For decades before the construction of the Panama Canal, the British, French, and Americans were interested in building an interoceanic canal. The debate was over where to build it across the Central American Isthmus, how to pay for it, and who would control it. Now, global trade implications were obvious. A canal would cut Atlantic to Pacific or Pacific to Atlantic voyage time by a third and eliminate hazardous journey around the tip of South America. The Russian settlers to California and Oregon in the mid-19th century was the initial impetus of the United States' desire to build an artificial waterway across Central America. 1855, the United States completed a railroad across the Isthmus of Panama, then part of Colombia. And this is an important aspect. Panama was not an independent country. It was part of Colombia, which could have been a problem, but it wasn't eventually. Various parties proposed let's build across this area, which is part of Colombia, Panama. Ulysses S. Grant was president of the United States between 1869 and 1877. His first year in office, he called for the construction of a canal connecting the Pacific and the Caribbean through the Isthmus of Panama, and sent 7 survey expeditions to explore the route between 1870 and 1875. Ultimately, the country of Colombia awarded the rights to build the canal to Ferdinand de Lesseps, the French entrepreneur who had completed the Suez Canal in 1869. Construction on the sea level canal began in 1881, but there was inadequate planning, disease among the workers, lots of yellow fever, lots and lots of yellow fever, and financial problems drove Lesseps' company into bankruptcy in 1889. 3 years later, Philip Jean Brunet Varro, a former engineer of the canal works and a French citizen, acquired the assets of the defunct French company. By the turn of the century, sole possession of the isthmus or the Isthmian Canal became imperative to the United States because of the War of 1898. You got Guam, the Philippines out there, you got Puerto Rico and Cuba out there, and the Americans wanted to control the Pacific, and they were able to annex Hawaii. And they got help from the sugar lobby in Hawaii. The sugar lobby was very, very upset in Hawaii because they really couldn't sell their product to the mainland United States. Why? Because of huge tariffs, huge tariffs. So they knew they couldn't compete with other people who were selling sugar in the United States because the sugar prices were too high. And William McKinley, who was president of the United States at that time, was a big tariff guy, and a lot of people didn't like paying a lot more money than they should have because of these massive tariffs, which weren't the best friends of consumers, I should say that. Anyway, so Hawaii becomes a part of the territory or territory of the United States. So you got to move material quickly from as far away as Guam and the Philippines to, say, Florida, and you need this canal. There's a little monument to this. Cuba, Puerto Rico, Philippine Islands. They don't have Guam listed on that monument. In 1902, the U.S. Congress authorized the purchase of the French Canal Company, pending a treaty with Colombia, and allocating funding for the canal's construction. There was a treaty in 1903 signed with Colombia, granting the U.S. the use of territory in exchange for financial compensation. The U.S. Senate said, "It's great, we'll do it." But Colombia said, "No, wait a minute. What are we really getting out of this? The United States is just taking our territory. We don't want to do it." Well, there's another idea. You know what? That little area of Panama, we'll just seize it. That's what we'll do. President Roosevelt gave tacit approval to a Panamanian independence movement, which was engineered in large part by the Canal Company. On November 3rd, a faction of Panamanians issued a Declaration of Independence from Colombia. "You're not getting the money, Colombia. You should have taken our deal. We're just going to take your land and do something about it. Try it." Well, Colombia couldn't do anything about it, so that was that. All of a sudden, there's a new country on the map. By November 6th, the United States recognized the Republic of Panama, and on November 18th, a treaty was signed with Panama, granting the U.S. exclusive and permanent possession of the Panama Canal Zone. Roosevelt, all of a sudden, had his land to build the Panama Canal. So what was American life like? Well, that's the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and you can see that it is crowded. You can see all the tenements, and the tenements are a problem. The average salary for a manufacturing job was $541 a year, which would be $19,400 a year. Postage stamp cost about 2 cents, 72 cents today. So the postage stamp of those days cost pretty much the same as today. A loaf of bread cost 5 cents, which would be $1.79 today. A pound of coffee cost 13 cents, which would be $4.66 today. Women were employed as domestic servants, laundresses, waitresses. Men were janitors, servants, and waiters. Very few homes had indoor plumbing. A deadly outbreak of typhoid fever occurred in Ithaca, New York, that killed 82 people, including 29 Cornell students. The outbreak was caused by contaminated public water. Remember, there really wasn't any gauge to see what the water was safe or not in those days, from the 6 Mile Creek Dam construction site. Tuberculosis was a major problem in those days. Respiratory illness that spread through airborne droplets thrived in unsanitary urban tenements, especially those with industrial air pollution. The immigration issue is becoming a major problem here, and this is talking about immigration figures from 1903. Anybody whose roots here are from Ellis Island, with ancestors coming over from Ellis Island? Anybody?
Anybody what?
Your ancestors coming through Ellis Island?
No, but I came here not through Ellis Island.
How did they come here?
I don't know, I came here through New Jersey.
Oh, no, but I'm talking about your ancestors.
Oh, they came by ship.
By boat?
Yeah.
Yeah, through Ellis Island.
There were no ancestors
Yeah.
before me.
Anyway, Ellis Island, during the so-called Progressive Era, which started around 1890, tens of millions of immigrants came to the United States through Europe. During this period, most came from Southern and Eastern Europe, particularly from Italy, Russia, and Slavic countries, and they were not true Americans, even though the immigrants before weren't true Americans. And the true Americans really are Native Americans. But many of the new immigrants came from poorer regions, had little formal education. Literacy, therefore, became a benchmark for their acceptance as Americans. Now, my background, my grandfathers were from Eastern Europe. One of them was from the Lublin area, and he came over sometime in the 1900s. The other one was born in 1900. He came somewhere after that. My grandmother was actually born here back in 1902 or so. That's the Stiller family. You might know you might recognize the Stiller name from Jerry Stiller, the comic.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, he's one of my relatives. He wasn't the funniest of the Stillers. My grandmother was much funnier than he was, but she didn't go into comedy. The other grandmother was born in Prague and came over after 1909 when she was born. 1906 rather. She was 23 when she got married in 1929. Anyway, so there was something called the the Immigration Restriction League. That was founded by Harvard Law School graduates, led by a guy by the name of Prescott F. Hall, and he said we need stricter rules for immigration. And this guy from Harvard, big deal, you're from Harvard. Who are you to tell us what to do? But Harvard had an awful lot of sway then, as it still does today, which may be unfortunate. In 1903, the IRL drew up a report to argue its case and identify those immigrants it deemed as undesirable, as opposed to those whose character and standards fit them to become citizens. Those people came from England, from Germany, Scandinavian countries, whereas the undesirables came from Eastern Europe and Russia. So that's what these boys from Harvard came up with. There was some increase in immigration from Northern and Western Europe, but the great proportion of immigrants had come from less than desirable races of Southern and Eastern European, and there has been a considerable influx of illiterate Japanese. The IRL, the Restriction League, wanted a literacy test as part of the immigration package. To get into the United States in those days, nobody explains this on cable TV. Nobody explains this on talk radio. Op-ed people like me who wrote op-eds in newspapers, never explained it. It was very simple to get to the United States if you were an immigrant in those days, extraordinarily simple. All that you had to do was live in a country that had a treaty with the United States. If they had a treaty with the United States, you were free to come, free to go. And that's basically it. There was no such thing as undocumented. There was no such thing as illegals in those days. All you had to do, be in a country that had a treaty with the United States. You want to go to the United States? You could go. Not a problem. Anyway, the Immigration Act of 1903, also called the Anarchist Exclusion Act, was a law of the United States regulating immigration. It codified previous immigration law and added 4 inadmissible clauses. You couldn't be an anarchist. You gotta remember, McKinley 2 years earlier was killed by an anarchist who was born in Poland, he didn't take marching orders from Emma Goldman, who was from Russia, who was also an anarchist, but they kind of linked the two together, although Emma Goldman had nothing to do with the assassination of McKinley. Anyway, people with epilepsy couldn't come. Beggars couldn't come. And if you imported prostitutes, they didn't want you. They didn't want you. You could have your homegrown prostitutes, but if you were bringing prostitutes to the United States, they didn't want you. And Theodore Roosevelt signed the act into law on March the 3rd. Now, long before the Montgomery bus boycott, which took place 69 years ago, literally this week, 69 years ago, long before other bus boycotts, there was the Arkansas streetcar boycott. Going back now 121 years. The Streetcar Segregation Act, adopted by the Arkansas legislature, assigned African Americans and white passengers to separate but equal sections of streetcars. The act led to boycotts of streetcar service in 3 Arkansas cities. The first day of the law enforcement was May 27th, and the boycotts began in 3 separate cities. Black patronage on the streetcars dropped in Little Rock, Pine Bluff, and Hot Springs by as much as 90%. J.A. Trawick the general manager of the Little Rock streetcar line, defended his company by saying not more than 10% of our regular Negro patrons are arriving. They can gain nothing by such a course. For the streetcar company to do nothing to change the law, which has been enacted by the legislation. This boycott wasn't successful. Lasted just several weeks. Nothing had changed. But it would be one of the first boycotts of a transportation system in the United States, and there'll be many more to follow in the ensuing years. This is a crowd watching a lynching. Lynchings were public events back in those days. And people don't want to talk about how a lot of towns, particularly sundown towns, get out of town by sundown, actually had lynchings. Lynchings were an everyday fact of life. On August 12th, after a white mob attempted to lynch a black man and failed in their efforts, armed residents engaged in widespread racial terrorism that forced black residents to flee Whitesboro, Texas. The mob went from house to house in the town's black neighborhoods, destroying the homes, beating the black people inside, and ordering all of them to leave Whitesboro. Black people fled by train that night, with news sources reporting the ongoing trains on the roads were filled with black people. I'm going to read this to you. It says, whip 17 Negroes. Since the assault by a Negro on Mrs. Blackman, all of the race have been warned to leave the city, but 17 refused to obey the order. They were caught and frightfully beaten. A reign of terror exists there, Whitesboro, Texas. A few days later, armed white men rounded up the few remaining black people, reported as just 17 people. The mob tied these 17 individuals to trees and whipped them mercilessly, ordering them to leave town again. Reports noted that after the conclusion of this violence, not a single black person remained in Whitesboro. Well, this is down the road here, Oyster Bay. And that's me, and that's Theodore Roosevelt. The accidental president becomes president in September of 1901, and he's running with William McKinley in the 1900 election, and the Republicans want to get rid of him. So they figure, make him vice president, nobody will ever hear from him again, and all of a sudden that cowboy, wasn't a cowboy, he was from New York, that cowboy is the president of the United States. And he has an interesting first year. It's called the Expediting Act. People don't like big companies. They don't like one person making all the money, whether it's Rockefeller or Vanderbilt, Carnegie, all those guys. They want their companies broken up. They don't want to see them take all the money and set the rates. They want to see companies busted up. And we're talking about 1902, not 2024. Although the United States officially passed the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1990, the law was not typically enforced by courts throughout the country. In most cases, the judges tended to side with businesses and corporations. Again, sugar industry. The American Sugar Refining Company was taken to court because they controlled 98% of the U.S. sugar trade. In 1895, just 5 years after the passage of the Sherman Antitrust Act, U.S. courts ruled in favor of the American Sugar Refining Company and refused to dissolve. Sugar does dissolve in water. Its hold over the industry. The Expediting Act was signed into law by Theodore Roosevelt. The American people were tired of the richest people, or the robber barons, making most of the money and wanted to break up trust by steel, meatpacking, oil, railroad industries, by expediting their cases to the top of the list so they could be dealt with more quickly. The law did this by allowing certain government suits to be appealed directly to the Supreme Court, bypassing the Court of Appeals. Roosevelt becomes known as the Trust Buster. Well, this is an old Model A. Henry Ford starts a company. Henry tried to start other companies. 1902, he tried to start a car company, had a fight with the other investors, he left. That car company became known as, I guess you would know this car, Cadillac? So in a sense, Henry Ford started the company called Cadillac, or at least put together the people, and then he left. So he tries again. It's June the 16th, Henry and 12 others invest $28,000, which would be slightly more than $1 million today. They create the Ford Motor Company. Henry owned 25.5% of the stock in the new organization. Henry Ford's contributions included mainly machinery, drawings for the automobile to be built, and several patents. The newly formed Ford Motor Company took its first order from a Chicago dentist by the name of Ernest Fenwick on July 15th. The dentist purchased an $850 car, which would be about $30,500 today, two-cylinder Model A automobile with a back seat. The car was produced at the Ford plant on Mack Street, now Mack Avenue in Detroit, and was delivered to the dentist about a week later. But not a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, but some people were not very happy with the automobile, particularly in Switzerland, where several Swiss cantons banned the automobile because it was a toy for the rich. People didn't like the rich. Toy for the rich, it was noisy, it was vulgar, it was dangerous, it was a terror-creating machine. Marin County, California, if you go north on the Golden Gate Bridge, the first area you hit is Marin County. The supervisors rejected popular support for a ban. They wanted to get rid of cars in Marin County. Of course, ironically, California is the home of cars. Although in San Francisco, they do have good mass transit with the BART system. Want to buy a motorcycle? You could buy a motorcycle in 1903. Harley-Davidson motorcycles. So you got cars, you got motorcycles. Some people have electricity. You're in the, and planes. You are in the modern world in 1903, although they didn't realize how modern the world was going to get. 1901, while working as an apprentice draftsman at the Barth Manufacturing Company, William Harley started designing an engine that could be mounted on an ordinary bicycle. Together with a childhood friend by the name of Arthur Davidson, they worked on designing a motorized bicycle with a small wooden shed in the Davidson's family backyard. Over the next few years, Harley and Davidson worked on a motorbike with the help of a guy by the name of Henry Milk, who owned a machine shop in northern Milwaukee. And here's another name you might recognize. Later, they received help from a guy by the name of Ole Evinrude. Evinrude would become the company eventually supplying motors to boats. So you got that too, who was then building gas engines of his own design for automotive use on Milwaukee's Lake Street. Harley and Davidson built their first successful prototype in 1903, which featured a loop frame, a gasoline-powered engine, and a leather belt drive. The Harley-Davidson Model Number 1 was the first motorcycle produced by the American manufacturer Harley-Davidson. Cost you $200, about $7,200 today. 38 motorcycles were made. So, who do you think came up with the windshield wiper, a man or a woman?
A woman.
A woman. A woman.
A woman.
A woman came up with the windshield wiper, and here she is. Her name is Mary Anderson, and she invents the windshield wiper on the spot, New York City trolley in 1902, or at least comes up with the design in 1902. It's November 10th. The Patent Office awards U.S. patent number 743801 to a Birmingham, Alabama woman, Mary Anderson, for her window cleaning device for electric cars. And there were some electric cars around in these back then. There were a few electric cars. And other vehicles to remove snow, ice, or sleet from the window. When she received her patent, she went to a Canadian company and said, hey, how about putting it on cars? The company said, no, this device has no value. It's not worth anything to anybody. No, we're not interested. Well, back in 1902, it's a winter day in New York City. Reminds me of a Paul Simon song. Anyway, it's a winter day. It's cold, it's snowing, it's sleeting. And by the way, Jerry Stiller, who I mentioned before, his father, Bill, was the streetcar conductor on Delancey Street. Now, Stillers were small people. They only went to about 5'4". And he wanted to become a subway conductor, but he wasn't tall enough. So he was there doing the streetcars. So anyway, she's on the streetcar. And she's watching the guy, the streetcar operator, he can't see through the windows because it's all iced up, and in those days there was no heating or defroster. But the trolley's car, the window was designed for bad weather, so you could flip a side panel open, or one of the panels open, so the guy could see what's going on, and he could move the snow from the other section by reaching over. And so he got all the ice and snow out of his way, out of his line of vision. The multi-pane windshield system did not work very well, as you would think. So she's on the streetcar, she's got a piece of paper, and all of a sudden she comes up, she's sketching out this wiper device while she's on the streetcar. She's thinking about this, and she tries it out. After a few false starts, she comes up with a prototype that worked. A set of wiper arms that they were made of wood and rubber and attached to a lever near the steering wheel of the driver's side. When the driver pulled the lever, she dragged the spring-loaded arm across the window and back again, clearing away the raindrops, snowflakes, or other debris. When the winter is over, you can get rid of it. You can remove them and store them until next year, or if you want to keep them on in the summer when it's pouring, you can have that. But companies weren't interested. Maybe you've gone over the Williamsburg Bridge. Maybe taken the Williamsburg Bridge from Brooklyn to Manhattan.
Yeah.
Or even been on the subway that goes across the Williamsburg Bridge. Well, it opens in 1903. And it was known as the East River Bridge. The Williamsburg Bridge is 7,308 feet long, a little over a mile. It was the longest suspension bridge in the world when it opened on December 20th. Legislation to incorporate the East River Bridge Company was introduced in the New York State Legislature January 1892. Now, in those days, Manhattan and the Bronx were separate from Brooklyn. Brooklyn was a separate city. And there were people when I was growing up, I don't know about it today, because I don't know too many people from Brooklyn anymore who live there. But there were people who said we should never have joined New York City in 1898. We should have stayed a separate city. On its own, Brooklyn would be the third largest city in the United States behind Los Angeles and Chicago, but it's not on its own. The company wished to build a suspension bridge across the East River from Manhattan, which was within New York City, to the then separate city of Brooklyn. There were numerous problems in the construction causing delays. The span cost $11 million, which would be almost $300 million today. This is a really strange story. That is an elephant named Topsy who is being electrocuted at Luna Park in Coney Island. Maybe you went to Coney Island. Now, Luna Park hasn't been around in a long, long time. It's a really, really strange story. Topsy the elephant gained notoriety in America as part of the Fort Pa Circus when she killed a spectator in 1902 who put a lit cigarette in her mouth, and she got very upset, and was subsequently sold off to Luna Park in Brooklyn. After her reputation worsened because of her alcoholic handler and the decisions by her owners, Frederick Thompson and Elmer Dundee, to exploit her for public relations purposes. They came up, Lunar Park, the owners came up with a publicity stunt to get rid of her, while at the same time advertising the May opening of the new Lunar Park. They decided charging admission to the public execution of an elephant would give them the attention the park needed. It worked. The execution of this elephant. Now, somehow Thomas Edison's involved in this, but he's not. The original plan was to hang her at the park, but that was stopped by the SCPA. Instead, they decided to electrocute her, which they did in front of the press. Remember, there's still the yellow press. There's still leftovers of that. You know, remember the Maine from only 4 years earlier, 5 years earlier. In front of the press in a camera crew from the Edison Manufacturing Movie Company. And that camera crew filmed the incident, possibly the first filmed death of an animal, on January 4th. There was this story about Thomas Edison, that he ordered the elephant to be electrocuted in order to prove the danger of alternating AC electricity during the War of Currents. This was false. The war between AC and DC took place 10 years before the death of Topsy, and Edison was never at Lunar Park. The Wizard of Oz premieres on Broadway. How many of you watched the movie The Wizard of Oz?
Of course, 1,000,000 times.
Yeah. How many of you got to see plays like The Wiz or some aspect of The Wizard of Oz? This thing can always come back to Broadway. There's no reason it can't come back to Broadway. It starts in 1902, though, and that's the Tin Man and the Scarecrow in that picture. On January 21st, The Wizard of Oz opened on Broadway at the brand new Majestic Theater on Columbus Circle. 1900, L. Frank Baum's book, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, was published. In the summer of 1901, Baum with the Wizard of Oz illustrator W.W. Denslow and composer Paul Tietjens began plans for producing The Wizard of Oz on stage. Baum wrote an operatic-style libretto that was quite faithful to the original book. Tietjens began writing the music to Baum's lyrics, and Denslow began to ponder designs and network with his theater friends to find a producer. The Wizard of Oz opened on June 16, 1902 at the Grand Opera House in Chicago. It was a huge summer hit. After playing 12 weeks, it set out on tour, the upper Midwest, then returned to Chicago for a few more weeks. I'm going to digress here for a second. How many of you saw Annie the play?
I do.
You saw Annie the play. Okay. This is the guy that got away in my life, Tom Meehan, who I knew back in 1977, 1978. I was just a young kid, 21, 22, and I never kept up with him. We developed, not a friendship, but we knew each other. He wrote Annie. He bought the rights to Annie along with Charles Strauss, who was his musical guy, around 1973. Didn't like Annie. I don't know why he bought it if he didn't like it, but he bought the rights from the Chicago Tribune Syndicate. And it goes up to Connecticut, and he's about ready to kill it. And Mike Nichols, remember Mike Nichols, did The Graduate, Nichols in May, he's there. And he says, Tom, you're sitting on $1 million. And they developed that play, developed that play, developed that play, developed that play. Finally, it's in shape to go to Washington, D.C. and the Kennedy Center. And me and Mike Nichols are talking. He said, it's not good for Broadway. It's good for Washington, but they'll kill you unless you rewrite it. And you have to rewrite it, and then you go to New York and see how it is in previews. And they rewrote it to the point where it became a super, super hit. Same thing happened here. They returned to Chicago, and they changed the finales to Acts 2 and 3. They rewrite it, they cut things out of it to get the show ready for Broadway. The show was a smash. After 9 months on Broadway, Wizard was ready to hit the road in September. The first of national tours went out, followed soon by the second, and The Wizard of Oz has been in some form of entertainment, whether it's plays, subsequently movies, since 1903 for 121 years. How many New York Yankees fans here? Any New York Yankees fans? Well, the New York Yankees started out as the New York Highlanders baseball team. It's January 6th, Frank Farrell and Bill Devery purchased the defunct Baltimore franchise of the American League for $18,000, $645,000 today, which is roughly the minimum salary in Major League Baseball. They moved the team to Manhattan. On March 12th, the New York franchise is approved as a member of the American League. The team will play in a hastily constructed Allwood Park, 168th Street and Broadway in Manhattan. Because the site is one of the highest spots in Manhattan, the club becomes known as the Highlanders, and their home field, Hilltop Park. Baseball's World Series begins in 1903. After 2 years of battling each other over baseball players, the established National League and the upstart American League signed a peace agreement before the 1903 season. They did not, however, make arrangements for a postseason series. The Pittsburgh owner, Barney Dreyfuss, arranged for the first World Series in August with the Boston Pilgrims and the Pittsburgh Pirates. Pittsburgh here is spelled without the H because around 1893, the government said that no city ending in the 4 letters or 5 letters, B-U-R-G-H, should have the H anymore. So they took
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Pittsburgh. So they took the H away. By 1909, the people in Pittsburgh found the original D, the Pittsburgh. They got back their H. It is the only town that got back its H. Pittsburgh did not have an H in those days. Anyway, with the Boston Pilgrims and the Pittsburgh Pirates well in front of the standings of their respective leagues, their owners agreed to a so-called World Championship Series best-of-9 format. In Boston on October 1st, the Pittsburgh Pirates beat the Boston Pilgrims, or Americans, 7-3. First professional World Series game. Most teams didn't have formal names at the time. The Pilgrims might have been used in a newspaper story. Boston won the series 5-3. Looking for a holiday gift? How about the teddy bear?
See, was it?
Yeah. You want a teddy bear? Looking for a Hollywood gift? Anybody give a teddy bear up as a gift at any time? Okay, it's February 15th. Toy store owner and inventor Morris Mitchtown places 2 stuffed bears in a shop window, advertising them as teddy bears. Mitchtown earlier had petitioned Theodore Roosevelt for his permission to use the nickname Teddy. The President agreed. Other toy manufacturers began turning out copies of Mitchtown's stuffed bears. Reports differ as to the exact details of the inspiration behind the teddy bear, but it is thought that while hunting in Mississippi in 1902, Roosevelt came upon an old injured black bear that his guides had tied to a tree. While some reports claim that Roosevelt shot the bear out of pity for suffering, others insist he set the bear free. Political cartoonists later portrayed the bear as a cub, implying that under the tough, outdoorsy, macho image of Roosevelt lay a much softer, sensitive interior. Morris and Rose Mitchtown founded the Ideal Novelty and Toy Company in Brooklyn after they invented the teddy bear. As far as Teddy Roosevelt, thought it was a silly idea. Nobody would ever buy that bear. I guess he was wrong about that. How many of you had kids over at your house and you needed for them to do something and you got crayons? Yeah, crayons. Well, you could buy Crayola crayons, 8 of them, in 1903. See, I told you how modern the world was. It was a lot more modern than you thought. Crayola did not invent the crayon. The modern crayon originated in Europe, initially made from a mixture of charcoal and oil, later replaced by powdered pigments. Wax was later substituted for oil, making the sticks sturdier and easier to handle. In 1902, Crayola crayons were invented by cousins Edward Binney and C. Harold Smith, the founders of Binney and Smith, of Eastern Pennsylvania. It would be offered for sale in 1903. The original Crayola box contained 8 colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, brown, and black. Sold for a nickel, about $1.79 today. Things go better with Coke? Well, do things go better with Coke? I knew people who took Coke, and they told me it was not a great drug to take. Coca-Cola was named for its 2 principal drug ingredients. Coca leaf from Peru contained Coca-Cola. Or rather, let's start again. Coca leaf from Peru contained cocaine. Coca nut from Ghana contained caffeine. The original Coca-Cola formula had a very small amount of cocaine in the 6-ounce drink, about 4.3 milligrams. Now, Coca-Cola says that the formula never contained Coca-Cola, rather cocaine. Let's start that again. I think I'm on drugs. Coca-Cola officials claim that the formula never contained added cocaine. At this point, cocaine is a legal drug. Coca-Cola addicts started attracting attention from the law in 1902. The Virginia legislature considered a ban of Coca-Cola because a doctor claimed a patient of his was driven to suicide by drinking the stuff. Other cases of death due to Coca-Cola, the habit, were reported, but an investigation by the company found that all victims were mixing alcohol and other drugs with Coke bottles. In 1903, Coca-Cola company decided to switch to de-cocainized or de-cocainized cola and coca. Their leaves, which the cocaine had already been exhausted, thereby castrating the featured ingredient of its formula. It was a terrible risk the company had to take. The public went right on guzzling Coca-Cola at record rates, rotting out their teeth, and making dentists, oral surgeons, and periodontists, like mine, very happy. Pulitzer Prize, as we wrap this thing up, Joseph Pulitzer's proposal to establish a school of journalism at New York's Columbia University was accepted by the university trustees. Pulitzer, the publisher of the New York World, first proposed to the school in the early 1890s. He wanted to establish the school to elevate journalism as a profession and use his wealth for a good cause. Pulitzer chose Columbia University because it was located in the newspaper publishing capital, New York, and already had a school of mines. Pulitzer offered $2 billion, about $72 million today, to build the school, build a building for the school, which would be dedicated to his daughter Lucille. The remaining funds would be invested and used to pay instructors and award annual prizes in journalism. So what happened in 1903 and how did it impact your life? Well, these 2 guys, Wilbur and Orville Wright, changed the world. In 1904 and 1905, they built and flew 2 more aircrafts from Huffman Prairie, a pasture near Dayton, Ohio. They continued to improve the design of their machines during these years, gaining skill and confidence in the air. By October 1905, the brothers could remain aloft for up to 39 minutes at a time, performing circles and other maneuvers. They were no longer able to work in secrecy or hide the extent of their success from the press, and they were concerned that essential features of their flying machine would be understood and copied by others. So they shut it down. They shut it down until they got patents, and they negotiated a contract for the sale of the machines. The Wright brothers changed the world of travel. Panama Canal. Well, if you've gone through the Panama Canal once, you've gone through it a million times, like I have. 1906, American engineers decided on the construction of a lock canal. Next 3 years were spent developing construction facilities and eradicating the tropical diseases such as yellow fever in the area. 1909, the construction began. August 15, 1914, the Panama Canal was open to traffic. After a period of joint American-Panamanian control, the Panamanian government took sole control of the canal in 1999. The canal is now managed and operated by the Panamanian government-owned Panama Canal Authority. That's the border between San Diego and Tijuana. She's now 41 years old. Anyway, that is the border. 1924, U.S. immigration policy changed by the use of the quota system. A century later, the Reed-Johnson law remains in effect, caused major problems in dealing with immigration. There have been few revisions in the act, but build the wall, immigration, illegal aliens, undocumented are major buzzwords in political campaigns, and seemingly no politician from any side of the political spectrum has a solution. But pundits on cable TV news make money off the issue. However, none of these TV pundits, newspaper op-ed contributors, talk radio experts have a solution either. That is Little Rock, Arkansas, 1957. 1903 legacy, 54 years later. Little Rock, Arkansas, a group of 9 black students enrolled in the formerly all-white Central High School. September 4th, 1957, the Governor Orville Farbus called in the Arkansas National Guard to block the black students' entry into the school. Later that month, Dwight Eisenhower sent the U.S. 101st Airborne to invade Little Rock, Arkansas to escort the Little Rock 9 into school. On May 27, 1958, Ernest Green became the first African American to graduate from Central High. The Jim Crow fight continued. Speak softly, carry a big stick. The Expediting Act worked to break up several large trusts that had been manipulating the market, and according to Roosevelt, taking advantage of consumers by increasing prices with no limits. The trusts that were busted up included steel, railroad, oil, and meat processing industry. Theodore Roosevelt brought at least 43 trusts to court. He was also against the formation of large trusts and conglomerations being formed. This is my friend Don Cundy. That is the Edsel, the Henry Ford Museum. Henry Ford was innovative as a businessman. But in 1919, Ford purchased the Dearborn Independent, published it under his own name, served as a forum for his views, free from other media outlets that had attacked his work and values outside of his control. The Dearborn Independent covered world events, business and economic news, and fiction from noted authors. It also served as an outlet for Ford's anti-Semitic sentiments. Ford republished the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a document that never really existed, but was produced by someone in Russia in the 19th century. Jews ran the world. Harley-Davidson survived numerous ownership arrangements, subsidiary agreements, poor economic health and product quality, and intense competition. But it makes money. How does it make money? Well, it licenses and markets merchandise under the Harley-Davidson brand. Among them, apparel, home decor, ornaments, accessories, toys, scale models of its motorcycles, video games based on its motorcycle line. Founded by Ole Everroot in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 1907, Everroot Outboard Motors was a North American company that built a major brand of two-stroke outboard motors for boats. Everroot went out of business in 2020. Here's Mary Anderson. It's her windshield wiper. The invention of the windshield wiper for her came way too soon. Cars were still in the future, not widely available. 5 years later, Henry Ford, 1908, his Model T hit the road, so cars became plentiful. But she didn't make any money off of this. It wasn't until 1922 when Cadillac began selling cars with windshield wipers as a standard feature. But her patent expired in 1920. She made no money off of it. The National Inventors Hall of Fame inducted Anderson into its shrine in 2011, 6 decades after her death in 1953 at the age of 87. The murder of an elephant electrocuted for murder. Thomas Edison was blamed for staging the electrocution of Topsy to discredit his rival. Story was a myth. But the movie company, Edison Studios, was an American film production organization controlled by companies that were owned by Thomas Edison. The studio made 1,200 films as part of the Edison Manufacturing Company, 1894 to 1911, and Thomas A. Edison.
You're repeating yourself now.
Yeah, this is the end. This is it, 1911 to 1918. The studio closed in 1918. 54 of his movies were full length, and the remainder short. Lunar Park ended in 1944. Yes?
I just want to tell you, my grandfather was a Rough Rider
Yeah.
with Teddy
With Teddy Roosevelt?
Yes.
Was
had-
he a football player?
No, I have
Yeah.
the original metal tin type of him.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
And Williamsburg Bridge.
Yeah, all of that.
Yeah.
They all lived in Brooklyn.
They all lived in Brooklyn.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
Take care. The Manhattan, Brooklyn, New York, Williamsburg Bridge remained the world's oldest suspension bridge for 21 years until the opening of the Bear Mountain Bridge in 1924 in upstate New York. The bridge was closed to motor and subway traffic on April 12, 1988, after large cracks were found in floor beams and cables. In June 1988, the mayor, Ed Koch of New York, decided to rebuild the bridge instead of replacing it. The job was done by 2002. And that's it. Any questions? Any comments? Your turn to talk.